Hello and welcome to this very special interview. With me is the President of Brazil, Mr. Lula da Silva. President da Silva, welcome to First Post.
Good evening. It's a great pleasure to be here talking with the Indian TV viewer, and I hope that we're going to have a great interview.
We look forward to it, Mr. President. How's your visit to New Delhi going so far, and how has the first day of the G20 summit been for you?
Well, actually, this G20 is a G20 that is exceptionally very well organized. We had, I would say, a lot of work. I arrived last night, and today we had 2 sessions that were hard work, and we had some other parallel events that were also very important. We launched a commitment together with Prime Minister Modi and President Biden, with Argentina, with Indonesia, commitment to follow a biofuel policy that is very strong so that we can fight the greenhouse gas effect, so that we can diminish the use of oil and try to use biofuel. So that was very important, this initiative, this commitment that was assumed by all the presidents that participated together with Prime Minister Modi. And so I am convinced that we will come out of this meeting with some guidelines where the countries will, what would they have to do from here onwards, so that we can diminish the inequality between the peoples, inequality amongst the countries, so that the world could live in a better way, and above all, so that we can confront the climate issue with great responsibility. It's not a joke what's happening on with the climate change around the world. If someone still has doubts that the climate, nothing will happen with the climate, I can reassure you that the most certain thing that exists today is that we are lacking with responsibility when we deal with the climate change, and we're being the victim of the lack of attention of humanity. The rulers lacked responsibility in dealing in an effective way to avoid that the planet will warm up, that we will lose control of these floods, and there's nothing to do. We still have time. We have to take care of the planet. I believe that this meeting will give a very good guideline to all countries so that we can manage to put in practice a good policy so that we can take care with great care of our planet Earth, of their forests, of its water, so that we can live well.
Mr. President, it's very, very good to see a world leader like you speak so passionately about climate, and we hope to see more leaders put it at the center of their policy making. I understand that India has been also pushing for climate action that is just, that does justice to the whole world, developing and developed. We've had some 200 meetings over the past few months in 60 Indian cities. What do you make of the progress that has been made so far, and what do you make of India's agenda?
I think it was an extraordinary, the India agenda that they developed, and the promotion of 60 debates or more in different cities. In Brazil, many ministers came to these meetings. We had the health minister, we had the mines and energy minister from Brazil, we had the science and technology minister, the enormous amount, the labor minister came here, and the finance minister came to these meetings. So these hundreds of meetings that you involving thousands of people is a new way that India is teaching to us that it's not sufficient for the presidents of the countries to participate. It's necessary for us to involve the government as a whole, and that we should involve the people that should participate in the debate. We learned a lot, and since we're going to host next year the G20 in Brazil, we will take from India many teachings, and so that we can have a G20 meeting as productive as we had here in India.
One of the big headlines today is the Delhi Declaration. We understand that there is finally consensus. We've seen the draft of the declaration, and all leaders have agreed. There was a fear that the war in Ukraine might hijack the agenda. And in the statements that followed since, it was said that Brazil, South Africa and Indonesia helped forge consensus. Can you tell us a little more about the conversation that went in, and how did Brazil contribute?
Well, the G20 is a forum that was built because of the 2008 and 2009 global financial crisis. From there onwards, the G20 started to discuss many economic issues, and the Bretton Woods institutions were also started to be discussed, the World Bank, the IMF, in an attempt to try to improve the functioning of these multilateral institute. That's why we didn't want here in India, we would discuss the war between Ukraine and Russia. This is not the appropriate forum for that. On the 19th of September of this month, we will have the General Assembly of the UN, and that's the place for us to discuss the war. That's the place for us to try to discuss peace. That's the place for us to call Putin and Zelensky in a negotiation table, and because no one wants war. Everybody is against war. We want peace. So it's necessary for us to establish a conversation policy so that we can try to convince the two presidents for Russia and Ukraine that the war is not the solution for anything, and that the dialogue, the diplomacy, and a table of dialogue could help much more. From the beginning, Brazil has been saying that we do not want to participate in the war efforts. Brazil wants to participate in the peace effort. We want to try to negotiate, as also India thinks like that, China thinks like that, many other countries think like Brazil, and so that's why we believe that it's very important so that the war issue should not be included in the document, in the declaration from the G20. That's very important. Otherwise, people go to war and then we lose and waste time instead of discussing the problems that involve 9 billion inhabitants, the hunger that is affecting 735 million people, unemployment of millions of people, and we stay here discussing something that is not our top priority. And so I believe that it was very important, the decision that was made not to allow that the war would come into our declaration. The declaration is very serious-minded. It's a mandatory reading for all of us that participated in the G20, and I hope that it serves as a guideline, as a roadmap, so that we can, in Rio next year, to do something even better. Now we have to start to go to actual policies. Now we're going to go to a phase that G20 doesn't have to stay anymore just discussing and philosophy. And no, we have to take commitments to make things change, to do things. The climate change issue is very serious-minded. We have to do something about it. And Brazil is taking the commitment of reaching 2030 with zero deforestation. And we have already ended hunger in Brazil once in the past. And now we have 33 million that are in hunger once again. And so we're going to end the hunger in Brazil again. And to end with hunger in Brazil, we have to create jobs. The economy has to grow. The poor has to come into the national budget of the different countries. When the government starts building its budget to know how much money the government is going to spend, they have to include the poor in that budget, in government spending. The poor has to be included in the government budget, because no one wants to include the poor. Now, in the moment that you put the poor in the budget, you start to diminish the poverty, because you know what happens when the poor receives a benefit. He receives a benefit, and he's not going to buy dollar. He's not going to keep that money. He's going to buy things. He's going to buy new clothes for his children. He's going to buy school material for the kids. So that means that the wheel of the economy starts working. This is what we're going to have to do from here onwards. We're going to have to make the economy move forward so that we can end with the inequality and with hunger in the planet Earth.
And I'm going to come back to all of these points, the very important subjects that you touched upon. But I also want to ask you, because until yesterday, the European and the G7 countries seemed intent on having their way with the language vis-a-vis Ukraine. How did you and others prevail upon them to ensure that there was consensus on the declaration?
Well, this is already a majority that is being formed within the countries. On the BRICS, for example, we didn't discuss the war during the BRICS summit meeting. We thought that there's other fora to discuss the war. And we could bring to India a debate, a discussion that has more consequence in Europe because they're involved directly in the war, and the U.S. is also directly involved in the war. But the other countries are not involved directly in the war. The other countries are involved in policy for peace, to develop a policy for peace. We have to talk about peace every day. So that's why we are already discussed with all the European heads of state and government. I discussed twice with President Biden. We don't want to discuss war. We want to discuss peace. When Putin and Zelensky are willing to discuss peace, then India will talk, Brazil will talk, China will talk, Indonesia, Argentina, and other countries will go to peace conversations. We'll talk about peace. We have to stop the war first. And then diplomacy should come in the picture so that we can see the world living in peace.
Would you say this consensus, in a way, is a win for New Delhi, and it establishes India as a bridging power in an increasingly divided world?
India will always be a power. It is a country that has a tremendous 1,000-year culture. It's a country that was already colonized, a country that managed to get its independence with the most extraordinary figure after Christ, which is Mahatma Gandhi. It's a country that has 1,400,000,000 inhabitants. It's a country that is the 6th largest economy of the world, a country that managed to build a cheap rocket and reach a part of the moon that not even the Russians managed, and the Americans managed to go to that part of the moon. So what happened here was the result of the competence of organization of the G20 that India organized as the host country. India is always a country that you have to take it very seriously, very respected country, and I will always say that because we came here and we established a strategic partnership between Brazil and India, and this partnership now needs to be improved so that the trade flow, foreign trade flow between Brazil and India should be the size of India and the size of Brazil. It should be very big because we can do that. So we have the conditions to do. So what happened here was a victory of the organization and of the respectability that we all have for India.
You had your first meeting with Prime Minister Modi in the month of May after your inauguration as the President of Brazil for a third term. What was your impression of him, and how do you see his leadership on this global platform?
The impression was very good. I had previous relations here with the former Prime Minister Singh, and it was a very good relationship with Prime Minister Singh. And the relationship with Prime Minister Modi was extraordinary. The two times that I met him, he conveys a trust, a confidence that he's managing India with great seriousness for the good and the benefit of the Indian people, and this is of the interest of Brazil, is that we should have a relationship with a ruler that has responsibility with their people. I know that India is a complicated country because it has many religions, many different languages are spoken here, so to rule a country the size of India is much more complicated for me to govern Brazil that has 200 million inhabitants. So I believe that he has given a clear-cut demonstration, extraordinary. He was re-elected once already, and it seems that he's running again for office next year. As people talk to me, he could be re-elected again. This means that this is a recognition of the people for the work that he's developing. And I remember that India was the 15th largest economy and Brazil was the 6th largest economy. Now India is the 6th largest and Brazil is the 12th largest economy of the world. The coup d'etat that was attempted in Brazil and an extreme right rising to power made Brazil go backwards in terms of its GDP growth. Now we took office and now we're making the GDP grow again because we want Brazil to have a strong economy, a developed economy.
Yes, I do want to come to talk about Brazil's economy, but for now, the G20 agenda, India and others have been pushing for the inclusion of the Global South, and today the African Union got membership of the G20, so now it is G21. How significant is this according to you? Do you think it is going to mitigate the imbalance and will ensure just representation of developing countries on international platforms?
I have been saying that 30 years ago, India and Brazil were treated as poor countries. Problems bigger than solutions for them. After that, Brazil started to be treated as third world country, and then we started to be treated as a developing country. And now we're part of the global south. That is to say, we decided to organize ourselves and to show that we want to grow, that we want our society should have a standard of living that is good, that should have a standard health care, and with that, education. And so the pharmaceutical industry in India is extraordinary. We want to have a partnership with them. And so there have been many investment here in science and technology. Brazil has to learn with India with that. We have to learn with India and invest more in science and technology. So what I believe is that India is a country that is rising. And I think that this is very important. As India managed to improve the standard of living of their people, the people starts to consume more. And when they consume more, they create more jobs. And when they create more jobs, they create more salaries. And when they create salaries, more consumption. And the gigantic wheel of the economy starts moving, and everybody starts to participate in the economy. So that's why I'm very optimistic with the growth of India, as was happy with the growth in China 20, 30 years ago when it happened. And when I'm happy when Brazil's economic growth makes me happy too. I was in Hiroshima, and the managing director of IMF said that Brazil would not grow this year. And then I just met her here, and I said to her, Brazil's not going to only grow, but Brazil will surprise the IMF. We're going to grow 3 times more than the forecast that the IMF thought that we would grow. So my assumption is the following. A lot of money in the hands of few means wealth concentration, means impoverishment. It means growth of the absolute misery and poverty and malnutrition, hunger. It means all that. This is a lot of money in the hands of few. Now, when you have few money in the hands of many, that means income distribution, that means more jobs, more consumption, more schools, more health care. You don't have to be an economist to reach this conclusion. You have to be a humanist. You just to think with your heart. The ruler cannot think only with his head, with his mind. He has to have feelings, think with his heart, because it depends on the government to develop the opportunities for people that did not have the chance to attend schools, that did not have the opportunity to get a good job. It is the government, the state, that should, the one that should guarantee that these people should have access to what is elementary in life, and that what is written in the Bible, it's written in the Constitution, it's written in the Universal Declaration of the Human Rights. And that's all written, and that's what the governments have to do. They have to abide to that. And so I'm very happy with the rise of India, the economic rise, and with India's participation in international multilateral fora, because it has an important role to play.
The G20 is essentially a forum to discuss economic issues, and China is the second largest economy in the world, and Chinese economy is not in a very good phase right now. China is also increasingly isolated politically. If you were the president of China, would you skip the G20 summit in New Delhi?
Well, I don't know what is the litigation that may happen between China and India. I don't know what are their conflicts. If I was the president of China, I would have come to the G20 meeting. Why? Why so? Because it's very important for us to participate in these fora, because we need to greet people, shake hands, look in the eye of the people, to have bilateral meetings and have direct conversations and discuss the interests of your country. Now, look, even China now, the way it is, it's still a country by the strength of its economy. It's the balance of the world. Brazil is not part of those that advocate a new Cold War between the U.S. and China. No, we want that the economy to be developed, that all the countries should go, create jobs. We don't want any kind of litigation or conflict. We have to understand that civil society needs harmony, hope, peace. That's what we need. We have to talk about peace and love and start, instead of talking about hate, divergence, we have to talk about something called solidarity. And this is what we're lacking now, on this heart in politics every day. So that's why we have these extreme far-right groups in many parts of the world. So I regret that President Xi Jinping didn't come. I don't know what was the reason, but I just was with him at the BRICS summit meeting in South Africa. And it was very important his participation in that summit meeting. So I'm very happy with China's growth too. And I'm very happy with the growth of any country in the world. Now, what is truly important is not only to grow. What is important is that this growth should be distributed for the people. Because if the growth is not distributed to the people, it's concentrated in the pockets of someone, or some people. So it's necessary that this growth should be distributed so that civil society should participate in the results of that growth that it helped to produce. This is the way that democracy works. Everybody wants to eat. Everybody wants to get dressed. Everybody wants to work. Everybody wants to have access to pleasure, to leisure. Everybody wants to travel. And so we're the ones that are responsible to work to make that happen. That's the only reason for which I want to be a president, is to prove that we can improve the lives of the poor people. So, look, in Brazil, I am the only president that didn't have a university degree. I only have the elementary school degree. Nevertheless, I am the president that built most universities in the history, federal institutes of education, and vocational training schools, and it was during my government that we put in more students in the university. And so, this is just to prove that when we want, we can do it. Sem dúvida. The president doesn't have to know about everything, but when he's in question, has a doubt, he consults and the organizations of civil society. There's a lot of people that have a lot of wisdom, that have expertise, that want to speak out. And so the government, I don't know if you perceive that all of us, we have one mouth to speak and 2 ears to listen. So it's necessary for us to have more capability to listen and not only speak, and maybe put in practice things that the civil society is speaking up to us. When we listen to civil society, we don't make mistakes.
That's a very interesting message. We should have the ability to listen more and speak less, you're saying. I wonder if that is a message to some leaders as well, to some countries. The U.S. has called China a spoiler. Do you agree with that term?
Well, I believe, I don't see very well this fight between the U.S. and China. I don't think it's a good thing, because it seems that this is an attempt to create a new Cold War. The experience of Cold War was not good for humanity. It was not good for the countries, the Cold War period. And so I believe that we won't have another atomic bomb, another nuclear war, but we won't have the Cold War either. Humanity needs peace. A country can only grow if it has peace, if it has investments. They can build new highways, new railroads, new buildings, new schools, new universities. But when it's in war, you don't build anything, you just destroy. And what you did at the cost, at the expense of the sacrifice of millions of people is destroyed by a bomb. And then you have to rebuild again. And so I would enjoy that the U.S. and China should also do well and the world should stay calm with tranquility. Everybody should work not only to build peace, but also to build the growth and economic sustainable development. Now that this issue is coming of wind power and solar power are coming strongly now, and that people are thinking to build a new energy matrix with climate change so that we can take care of the planet because we're to avoid the greenhouse gas emissions and a low carbon agriculture. We have to be united to do all that. We have to be united. We live in under the same house. India lives in a house. I live in another house. Biden lives in another house. Xi Jinping lives in another house. But it's the same house. It's the same world. There's no way for you to escape. If this boat goes down, shrinks, everybody will go down. And so, for God's sake, let's stop with the divergence and let's seek for consensus. Let's stop thinking about war and think about peace. Let's stop conveying hatred and convey love. And let's take care of the poor people, the working class, the working people, the ones that did not have an opportunity in their life because the government, the state did not allow them to have an opportunity. Because no one is poor because they want to be poor. No one makes an option to be poor. No one is born and says, I want to be poor when I grow up. No, everybody wants to live well. Everybody wants to have a good job. Everybody wants to study. And it is the state, the government is the one that has to guarantee to make that happen for the people. This is what I believe in. This is what guides my life. And this is what I've done under 2 terms in my previous terms in Brazil, the president. This is what I'm doing the 3rd term as president. My political preaching is for peace, for love, for development, and for the distribution of the benefits for all the population.
Mr. President, can there be peace when one player or one member of the House that you mentioned does not respect the territorial integrity of others? You mentioned balance of power. That's a term that you also used in your visit to China earlier this year, which was a high-profile visit. China is increasingly seen as an expansionist power in the region, and it has territorial disputes with practically all its neighbors. In your private conversations with the leadership, do you impress upon them the need to uphold a rules-based order?
Deixa lhe dizer uma coisa.
Let me say something to you. Brazil has borderline with all South American countries. We have almost 17 million square kilometers of borderline, and we have no conflict, no litigation with any country, and we don't want to have such conflict or litigation. We believe that the United Nations does not represent anymore for which it was created for. So that's why that we are advocating a change in the membership of the UN Security Council, that more countries should participate in the UN Security Council. India should participate, Germany should participate, Brazil should participate, Japan should participate, Mexico should participate, Argentina, or either Egypt or Nigeria or South Africa, because the UN Security Council doesn't represent the political geography of today, but only of 1945. And we have a UN Security Council that are the 6 permanent members that are, there's the ones that have atomic bombs, they're the ones that sell weapons, there's the countries that go to war without consulting anybody. It is true that Russia invaded Ukraine without consulting anyone, and the U.S. invaded Iraq without consulting anybody. England and France invaded Libya without consulting previously anyone. And we believe that it's possible to respect the fundamental principle of the United Nations. Brazil is 100% against the invasion invasion of territorial integrity of any other country. Brazil is against that. Against Russia, against China, the U.S. Brazil will be against any country that puts in practice in territorial invasion of another country.
Very good to hear that. You mentioned Russia. The Russian president is not here. He did not even go for the BRICS summit. Next year, Brazil will be hosting the G20. Would you like to welcome President Putin to Brazil for the G20?
He will be invited, because next year we will have the BRICS being hosted by Russia. Before the G20 in Brazil, we'll have the BRICS meeting in Russia, and I will attend the BRICS meeting in Russia next year. I believe that the Prime Minister Modi will also go to Russia, and I think that Xi Jinping will go. South Africa will attend, and Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates, Egypt. Everybody's going to attend the BRICS meeting, and then I hope that they also come to Brazil's G20 meeting. Brazil, they will feel a peace environment in Brazil. So they're going to feel that in Brazil, we enjoy music, we enjoy carnival, we enjoy soccer, but we enjoy peace. And we like to treat well people. So I believe that Putin can go easily to Brazil.
You're signatories to the Rome Statute, though, and there's an arrest warrant against him.
Well, what I can say to you is that if I'm president of Brazil, and if he comes to Brazil, there's no way that he'll be arrested. No, he will not be arrested. No one is going to lack respect of Brazil. If you arrest someone in Brazil without the authorization of the government, you are not respecting Brazil. People have to take seriously the country of Brazil and its independence.
Of course. Your government refused to supply weapons to Ukraine, and in the past you have criticized Western military aid to Ukraine, saying that this has prolonged the conflict. Would you say that the West, with its continuous military aid packages, is part of the problem in this war?
Let me tell you a short story. In 2022, was spent $2,224 billion in weapons, in arms. If this money had been spent in education, fighting hunger, investment in social inclusion, certainly the world would be much better than with the war in Ukraine. So it's for us to use the good senses of the people, the common sense of people. If you have awareness before you go to war, if you have your senses, use all the conversation mechanisms or facilities that may exist. Have a meeting, 2 meetings, 3, 10 meetings, whatever. The only thing that you can't do is go to war. When the U.S. went to war against Iraq, I was talking with President Bush in those days on December the 10th of 2002. I was not president, but I was president-elect. And I told President Bush, President Bush, Iraq, they don't carry chemical weapons. The general director of the UN Agency for Chemical Weapons was a Brazilian ambassador. And he said, there's no chemical weapons in Iraq. And then the lie was told by the American government and by the Iraqi government that said they did carry those weapons. Iraq was lying because they wanted to sell a force that they didn't have. And the U.S. was stubborn and went to war with Iraq. Until today, the chemical weapons were not found in Iraq. The chemical weapon had led to the murder of Saddam Hussein. So you need a lot of wisdom from the human being. War is not of our interest, of the human beings. And then another severe thing that is happening are the blockades, the sanctions. For example, the blockade against Cuba is 60 years already. The embargo against Cuba and the embargo against Venezuela, the embargo against Iran. An embargo is a weapon that is worse than a bomb. Because at war, You have soldiers fighting soldiers, but in an embargo, you victimize children, women, kids that do not have nothing to do with the war. So we rulers, we need to change our behavior. I can't imagine that Cuba has a blockade, an embargo for 60 years long, and that people don't manage to survive well in the way they want to live. So I believe that the first opportunity I have with President Biden, I'm going to say to President Biden that it's necessary to stop, to penalize Cuba. Cuba is not a country that has terrorists. I've been going to Cuba for more than 30 years. I've never seen any action of the government to give incentives to the terrorists. They have to take out this charge against Cuba that it's a terrorist harboring country and get rid of the embargo to help them survive. There's no explanation. I didn't agree to the embargo when I was 50 years old. Today I have 77 years of age. And it's been all for 27 years. I don't understand why the embargo continues against Cuba, because there's no mass weapon of destruction in Cuba. So it's necessary to find other ways to do politics in the world. The planet is becoming overcrowded, and soon we will be 9 billion people. And the raw material is the same. The geographic space is the same. And so we'll have to learn to live with peace. We're going to have to learn in harmony. Otherwise, we will destroy ourselves. And the human being, I should say, is the only animal on the planet Earth that do things to cause damage to themselves. And so we need a civilizatory process to reintroduce civilization so that humanity could live in peace, in harmony, with tranquility. That's what we need. This is what I wish for the world. This is what I wish for my country. And this is what I wish for the people that participate in the multilateral institutions. The IMF has to help people. It cannot penalize people. The World Bank has to have people and not penalize people. The poor countries. Let me give you another example. The African continent has a debt of $800 billion. You can't pay back that debt. It's unpayable. So it's necessary for us to find a way to transform this African debt in investments for infrastructure, where the countries could be lifted from poverty and grow and have the prospect of participating in the wealth of the world, having a share of the wealth of the world. It's not difficult. It's only for us to think a little bit with our heart and not only with reason.
You've spoken about, you call them the blue-eyed bankers, the IMF and the World Bank and their policies, and you're saying the sanctions are not the way to deal with the situation. Do you think that the current approach is going to precipitate an economic downturn?
All of us, we have to take responsibility. Brazil, when I was there, after almost 4 years of a disaster, where Brazil was governed by a fascist and that was only preaching hatred, and he would tell 11 lies per day. And I think that he has liability for half of the deaths that we had due to COVID-19 in Brazil, because he denied the vaccines. He said that he didn't believe in the COVID, and that if someone took a vaccine, it would become a crocodile. He would give recipes, prescriptions for medicine that had nothing to do with the COVID-19. So the world needs to get rid of these people. And the people need to have, as a ruler, people that have sensitivity, people that believe in the human being, that are humanists, people that do not want the evil for anybody. And I'm not obliged to like anyone or someone. No one is obliged to like me. But what I want is that people should respect me as I am, and I should respect the people as they are. And that's what I want. Each one should have the religion that they want. Each one should be the fan of any sport team that they want, vote for whoever they want to. When the electoral process is over, we have to rule for all, govern for all. You have to govern for the rich and the poor. Now, you have to do what my mother used to do. A mother does not let one child to eat more and earn more than the other. So in government, you have to treat everyone with equal conditions with a gaze to the poor. The poorest ones are the most people that don't even want, that need more caress, more warmth, that need an additional aid. That's how I think that the rulers should govern their countries.
Coming back to Ukraine, do you think now is the time for a negotiated settlement? And would you like to play mediator between President Zelensky and Putin?
No, I believe that the time has passed. I believe the two presidents still think each one is going to win the war. So when some side thinks that they're going to win, they don't want to negotiate it. And I regret all the deaths that you can't come back for life. No one will give back their lives that were lost. I regret deeply almost 8 million people that or shifted or had to move outside Ukraine, that fled and trying to live in other countries. I regret the destruction of the material goods that people themselves built. And so I believe that every day, all the time, is peacetime. And no time is wartime. No. If it's necessary, if I'm invited, if I'm called, if I have a contribution to give, I would enjoy to participate together with India, together with China, together with other countries. But it is important that the U.S. and the European Union should have the willingness to help us to build peace. I understand the speeches of each one from Europe, because Europe is very close to the war, and I can understand their speeches. And I understand the U.S. too, that it seems they have a lot of against Russia. I have nothing against anybody. I want to do well with the U.S., I want to do well with Russia, and I want to do well with India, and I want to do well with China, and I want to do well with my consciousness and with God.
Of course. You attended the BRICS summit last month, and we saw an expansion of the BRICS. There was a report, or many reports, that said that China wants to create an anti-Western bloc, and that's the direction that it was taking. I understand that some countries were not on board with that idea. You endorsed the idea of a BRICS common currency to take on or to replace the US dollar. Are you happy with the direction that this grouping is taking?
Well, first of all, I did not endorse of a common currency. Brazil proposed the idea for a long time for a need of the countries to build a currency so that they don't need the dollar. I can negotiate with India with my own currency and India with their currency. The same thing, my currency with the China's their own currency. The Europeans created the euro. Why can't we create a new currency for trade? But we'll keep our own national currencies. What we did was to allow that the finance ministers of the BRICS countries have 1 year to find a solution for this new currency. And we do not want to confront anybody with this idea. We don't want to go against the G7, because I'm also a guest at the G7. I participate in the G20, in the BRICS meetings. I participate in the IPSA, which is a group, India, Brazil, and South Africa forum, that China does not participate in the IPSA. And so we have to have the awareness that no one wants to create a bloc against another bloc. What we want is to be treated with respect and under equal terms. This is what we want, only that. And India has the right to be not only a big country in terms of population, but a great country in terms of the quality of lives of their people, of its people. Brazil too has that right. China too. The U.S. too. All of us dream that our people will reach the welfare state that Europe has achieved. We dream of a welfare state, and we know for that this is a very difficult task to reach that welfare state, because we have to find more ores, more richness in nature. And I don't know if nature has all that wealth for us to find. We cannot live in a world, possibly, where 2% of humanity has much more wealth than 50% of the poor.
I know you have to go for dinner, but I want to ask you two very quick questions. One, at the BRICS summit, there was a picture of you along with the Indian Prime Minister that went viral. You were looking at a newspaper, and we were all very curious to know what was the conversation that you were having at that time.
I was congratulating the Prime Minister Modi for the conquest of reaching the space with a rocket, cheap rocket, and to manage to reach a place where 4 days before that, the Russians failed to reach the moon. So I think it was an extraordinary achievement with science and technology for India. So I was congratulating the Prime Minister, and he was very proud of the achievement.
And my final question, a lot of people have seen you making speeches at global forums. We've heard about your views on politics, your views on climate change, economy, but not many people know that you also watch movies from India. Do you want to tell our audience about the movie that you liked?
Yes. The last film that I watched from India is a film called Revolt, Rebellion and Revolution. RRR. It's a 3-hour feature film, and it has very funny scenes. There's beautiful dance in the film, and there is a critique, a deep critique to the British control over India and conquering India. Sincerely, I believe that this film should have been a box office here in India, and I believe that it should be making success around the world, because everybody that talks to me, the first thing that I say is, have you watched the 3R film? Revolt, Rebellion and Revolution. And so many times we see that the Indian film, and people don't even know that India has good movies, a good movie industry. Many times people are not aware of that movie industry, that they have good films from India. So sincerely, I enjoyed very much this film from India. The political side, I enjoyed also the dance, the joy that was shown in the film, even when the critique is done in a very humor. The critique is perfect, even using humor. So I congratulate to the directors of this film, to the artists, because it enchanted me.
Well, India has a fantastic film industry, and thank you. Through you, I'm sure the audience across the world will also know about it a little more. Thank you, Mr. President, for your time and for your thoughts and for answering all the questions that we put to you.
Thank you, Palki. Thank you very much. And I hope that the people from India that will watch your show forgive me for speaking too much.